Hello, I'm Tony Vlahos for ExecuNet. Thanks as always for tuning in. With me today to share his views on the executive employment scene, including how to secure an offer in this market and what summer 2021 might have in store for job seekers, is Joel Koblentz. He is part of the Koblentz Group, which is recognized for successfully recruiting senior leaders for public companies, investor-controlled enterprises, and family businesses globally. Joel, it is always good to be talking to you.
Pleasure to see you again, Tony.
Same here. So let's dive right into it, Joel. Are there more executive jobs now than there are available candidates?
You know, it's an interesting question because I think it's a question of perspective. I've never seen qualified candidates, and we should talk about what a qualified candidate means in a second. We've never been in such short supply. Okay. Why are we in such short supply? Well, we're in short supply because companies are going through this transformation at such a pace that what they thought was a qualified candidate or a job description or however they presented it to a potential candidate, oftentimes, and even accelerating so, is changing as the search goes on. So the benchmarks for what they were really seeking at the front end, what they said they were really seeking, changed. So that means that searches change, they adjust, the recruitment changes, and so forth. Work we're doing right now, for example, and I'll share two with you because they are not search related, but they're related to the topic. So let me just kind of launch into that. Both of them are a leadership succession for the CEO. Even boards are struggling with this. So it isn't only the candidate looking at a specific job. Boards are struggling with this because historically, just like in job search, the board would have a succession review. They'd probably put a name in an envelope if poor Joel wasn't around, that we have our candidate. Well, the world changed. And so how do you move succession along at the same pace that your company is transforming, and therefore the qualities, the experience, the know-how, the leadership, the collaboration, the communication all change. Look at the world that we're in. The world we're in now is a rebalancing between stakeholder rights, if you're looking at it from a board's point of view or a leadership point of view, and shareholder responsibilities and rights. And that kind of re-gearing, if you will, is leading to companies to rethink the qualities that they're looking for in candidates. And they think about it as the search progresses. So what they thought they were asking for in the front end may still be operative, but the shades of gray of how it changes as things are changing at such a rapid rate. So there was recently a survey done by a consulting firm that talked to CEOs, and CEOs said, if COVID did anything for them, it accelerated the digital transformation of their companies, accelerated it. Well, what does that mean? Well, it translates to the quality that they look for individuals to lead various business units and or to be functional leaders for those businesses or business units. So that's the world in which we're changing. That's what we see. It's forced us, by the way, it's forced us to be much more flexible in what we do as well.
Well, that was part of my next question. How has the role of the recruiting firm shifted, considering what corporations are after these days from their executive candidates?
Well, there's really kind of, in the recruiting world, and these are my words and others may not agree with me, there's really kinds of two types of firms. There are the large global plug and play firms, okay, which manage themselves almost as professional service enterprises, where the partner has all kinds of support all the way down the line. And then you have a second group, which spends a lot of time investing in understanding the client's business, understanding the alignment. You'll hear me talk about alignment, just the questions that you and I've talked about previously. And it really, what's the alignment? Well, it's really understanding two kinds of sidebars. The first is what priorities do we really have for this business? What strategies are we really pursuing to achieve those priorities? what's our entity really look like? What do our business units look like? How are we organized in those business units? And what kind of leadership do we need to drive through that organization, through that structure, deliver those strategies so that we meet the priorities? And then the second sidebar of that is the culture, which, by the way, is changing. So as these companies move forward, as they transform, the culture that they need is got to change. Some of it we hear about is speed. Okay, we've got to move faster. Problem of moving faster is sometimes the individual who's leading the charge on the white horse with the saber looks back and there's nobody behind him. He's moved too fast. So they basically, companies are trying to figure out, and leaders are trying to figure out, how do I collaborate? How do I build trust? How does our culture need to change so that we can deliver with speed, we can deliver with torque, and then use that to go up through the alignment that I described to deliver on those priorities. If they fail with that, then the pressure will come from both shareholders and stakeholders. And what we're seeing is, while this is going on, while these if you will, atmospheres change and spin, and this regearing, is it does affect candidates, because what they thought they were looking for, as these things evolve, even during a search, it changes. And even you find people in organizations who were part of the decision to look for a certain type of candidate, they mean different things when they consider what that specification really is. Take a word in English. Take the word to. Well, it could be TO, it could be TOO, it could be TOO, couldn't it? So misunderstanding and not being clear, not collaborating, not understanding from a candidate's point of view that these two ideas, the cultural change and the alignment, with the centerpiece being transformation, with both pieces have to fit together, has led to the changing, if you will, of how one looks at candidates. And it's forced us to look at candidates. So the second group in recruiting are firms that spend their time to really understand the client. They don't say, here's 25 people who kind of meet the spec, who do you want to talk to? We just saw that from another large recruiting firm for a potential client of ours. On the other hand, it takes a lot of effort to make the decision. So what we found in our practice, and again, we may be an anomaly. I couldn't tell you because I only work in our practice. We ask a fundamental question of ourselves. Do we know enough that if we were the client, the future was at stake, the chips were in the middle of the table, the cards were about to be turned over, is this a candidate that we must see? Because if not, that candidate won't be seen by the client. In a way, it sounds a little brutal, but I have to say it saves the client a lot of energy and time, and it saves the candidate from getting all wound up and wondering why he or she is not communicated with, and on and on and on, which I know is a big issue. So we've tried to make this as simple as we can by investing in the client and also investing in the candidate, because it has to work from both sides, irrespective of who you represent, or irrespective of how you're compensated for the service. It has to work for both sides. If it doesn't, then what does the client say? It's a failure. Okay. What do we think? We think we failed. So we're trying to get to a success quotient where candidates can feel that they're being fairly represented, that they have the stuff, if you will, that client really seeks and really needs, and the client feels the same way. So it makes a much more robust conversation between the two.
Let's talk about the candidate a bit more. So we have an executive who desperately wants to be seen, as you put it, as a must-see candidate.
Mm-hmm.
Now, clearly, there's a lot of what you described, Joel, that executive does not control. Let's talk about what they do control. If you want to, in other words, be seen as a must-be-seen candidate, what do you need to do in this marketplace to differentiate and be seen for having all the right stuff for a particular organization?
Well, most candidates present themselves by wanting to tell their life story. And unfortunately, most interviewers for corporations ask the fundamental question, tell me about yourself. Well, I think in telling you about yourself, if you ever get that question, the smartest thing the candidate can do is pick 3 important themes in their career where they developed an outcome, okay, a tangible outcome that helped that company through the alignments that we talked about. Because those alignments, the structure on one side, up to value and priorities, the culture on the other side, of how you moved an organization, how you moved the needle, okay? That's what they want to hear. Those are the kind of candidates that they want to see. Whether you're talking about a financial officer, you're talking about an operations person, a supply chain leader, an IT leader. It matters less about the role, but about moving, showing you can move the needle. Because the predictive ability to say the future is going to look like this, we all know that that's a fallacy. But we need to have people who are lifelong learners, who've shown they could jump into things and get a result, even if they weren't experts in it. And that's what our clients are seeking. Mm-hmm. Okay, so candidates, if they could present themselves that way, Tony, that they are problem solvers, they understand and are sensitive to cultural transformations the same way they're transforming in a business sense. Those two linkages are really, if candidates can present themselves that way, they're going to have a better chance of landing the role. Now, the question then is, will the interviewer appreciate that that's what you're doing? Well, not everybody will. But if you want to be a transformational leader that everybody talks about, find companies that will appreciate that. Because otherwise, you're just kind of, you're a plug and play, you're sitting in the hole, and that's your job. Mm-hmm. Fewer and fewer companies want that. I can tell you the private equity firms want the transformative. I can tell you the corporations want the transformative, but the bureaucracies, the mid-level bureaucracies, push back against it. Not in our swim lane, not invented here. Why should we do it? There's still a lot of that there. Family businesses are somewhere in between, depending on if a family member's running it or they have other people running it with their interests. So that's what we're faced with right now. But that would be my advice, is just how you frame your experiences. And don't get caught up. Don't get caught up in talking about, you were the most popular kid in the third grade, and start there. Get right to your themes, be very specific, and think about it. It's not an elevator pitch, but think about exactly how it's going to be received. Know something about that company and know what it's going through. Okay. If you know what it's going through, you can tailor your themes to that conversation, to that leader, to where you can really be helpful. And they could say, we could see this person being on our team. We could see this person as being more than just adding a human. It's adding real value. And that's the bottom line. How do we add real value as these two parallel universes between culture on one hand and deliverables, if you will, on priorities? If you can play in that game, you'll be in demand, because that's where the short supply is of executives.
Absolutely. What a perfect nugget you just served our audience. Thank you for that. So one last question, Joel. Traditionally, summertime has meant certain things to executives, especially those in transition or those thinking about it. So if it's summertime and you're leaning into that period and you're thinking about a search, or in fact in transition, this year of all years, what might you be thinking or doing differently? What do you need to be doing differently to differentiate, to stand out, to be seen as the person who's hired?
Let's talk about what's going on so far this year, because that sets the frame of what we want to talk about in the summer. There was pent-up demand for the executive of the quality that I've described. Okay, those people are now becoming in place, and they're becoming part of the system, if you will, of the hiring system. So we've seen somewhat of a slowdown as those people become absorbed, because they are critical pieces to the continuing transformation of these companies. And because they're from the outside in, you think about leadership, it's the theory of small groups. So small groups can influence culture. So these two pieces are moving together. Now, what's happening more currently is, as they absorb and get into these roles and understand what really needs to be done, more specifics, they get to know their teams, they get to know what the opportunity of using that team, leveraging the values, leveraging the resources, they're going to begin to look at the next level down. Okay. And that's what's happening now. Sure, there's still the leadership searches we work on and the board searches we work on. But the reality is, when we put someone in, the chairs begin to change, because the expectations of why they were brought there You can't expect the existing team to fill the hole. Okay. This individual's been brought in because they can run those parallels. And now they've got to find a team that can deliver on those parallels. Okay. So we're starting to see going into the summer that next generation of change. So, for example, we did a CEO search for a company in retail services, public company, and we completed that in April, I believe it was. He's already come back to us, the new CEO, and talked about, this person is not going to be able to handle this. I'm not talking about the candidate, but he said, my financial officer is struggling because of this. We're going to have to make these changes. Our chief legal officer, he's talked about retiring. Maybe now's the time. So, we're beginning to see that kind of a change. Okay, summer traditionally has been a slowdown, but I think if you start looking at companies that have just changed the top leadership, and you understand the company, you understand why you look at the background of somebody who's come in. Usually, it's public information. It gives you some sense of what the adjustments they're trying to make, and if you can speak to those adjustments. If you have an opportunity to speak to that company and speak to those adjustments, I don't think you have to worry about the demand in the summer versus the fall versus the spring. It's really going to be about, at this point in time, you have the skills, the experience, the know-how to really drive the value that the individual who you might be working for has been asked to do it. I just had a conversation with an individual who has been promoted into running a cargo business for one of the major airlines. And, he knows his team. He was promoted into the role, but he's even called to talk about, well, I don't know, what we have to do going forward versus what we had done. It's a different ballgame. So we're going to have to think about that. So understanding what an industry is really about, understanding how it's been changing, understanding the new leader that's come in, look at the backgrounds. And then you begin to understand, if you read some of the investor call transcripts, you understand which way these businesses are really trying to peel themselves, one way or another. And if you can speak to that, you don't have to worry about the summer. They're going to continue on. And usually the summer was a dead period for most of us. It would pick up, maybe in August or so, and then it would be pretty high volume till November. At that point, it kind of slowed down. Still slows down at the end of the year. At least we'll know better this year how much of an anomaly it is. But this summer, it's still moving quickly. But you got to be able to pair up. You've got to be able to match what they're trying to talk about. Not just you. I was the most popular kid in the third grade, and I wore a red shirt. That doesn't work any longer. The ties of we went to the same school together. That doesn't work, really. It's all about value. All about value. We used to say you couldn't present somebody if they didn't have this kind of degree or from this kind of school. Nobody even asks us anymore. Okay. And the board searches we've done, and I've done several hundred of them, there's all these certification programs that one can have. And all the board searches I've done, not one client, not one before, and certainly not one now, has ever asked, is this person certified by this group or that group? No. They want value. Mm-hmm. They want value.
Terrific.
You can show the value, then summer is irrelevant.
Well, with that, Joel, thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing your insight as always. It's invaluable to us and our audience. So thank you. And I look forward to our next chat together.